Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the solved case of Banaz Mahmod. This case is really sad, and it was basically an honour killing committed by her family. I'd just like to let you guys know that I've gathered the information off the internet. I mean, don't disrespect anyone I'm going to talk about today. And this video is for educational purposes. Banaz was born on the 16th of December in 1985. She had one brother and four sisters, so she was part of quite a big family really. The family was originally from Iraqi Kurdish, but they actually moved to England when Banaz was just 10 years old. And they then lived in Mitcham, South London. Banaz was a very soft-spoken girl. She was described as having a beautiful soul, and she always tried to make those around her happy. And Banaz really did long to find love. She was raised in a strictly Kurdish family, and they did practice arranged marriages. So at the age of 17, she was forced by her parents to marry a man who was from her hometown of Qualadiza. I apologise if I've said that wrong or pronounced any of these names incorrectly. Sometimes I do struggle with the pronunciations. Now, this man was 10 years older than her. He was described as very old-fashioned and kind of having the mindset of 50 years earlier. And I think the pair only met once before they were forced into a union. Now, as with a marriage, you would assume that it would be generally a happy one. But unfortunately, their marriage was not to be that way. Now, her husband would actually beat and rape her regularly. He actually beat her so badly once that her ears were bleeding, and he repeatedly kicked her in the face. And it's just horrendous to even think about. And eventually that did lead to her becoming very forgetful.
And he had like twisted my hand really strongly there. So one of the bones, it has like stand out from my other wrist. Most of the times when I'm cleaning my ears, it bleeds.
The parents were aware of the abuse that she was suffering. She did let them know, but they just basically said that if you leave him, you'll bring shame on our family. She did also report this at some point to the police, that she'd been raped and beaten by her husband.
I didn't try to defend myself or anything. I just cried, and that was it.
She had no idea what to do. Like I said, her family told her that it would bring shame on the family if she left him. So she stayed with him. She did actually manage to escape from him several times, but was just simply brought back to him. It really did seem like her family just didn't care as to how their daughter were being treated by this man. Finally, after 2 years of continued abuse, continued rapes, Banaz eventually left her husband.
I said that I wanted to divorce no matter what by this afternoon. I was really angry, shouting down the phone. And I packed some of my personal things and I left.
And who could blame her? I mean, she'd suffered for 2 years at this point. All she wanted to do was find love and raise a happy family, and this man was abusing her, so obviously she's going to leave him. She actually moved back into her family's home in July of 2005. And I would assume that her family were certainly not impressed with this, and especially when she started to see a man of her own choosing. And this man was called Ramat Soleimani. She seemed to really like Ramat. He was a man that she picked for herself rather than her parents picking someone for her. And they loved doing things together. They just generally loved spending time with each other. And for a while, they did actually manage to keep their relationship a secret from her family. And the family and the community that they lived in were constantly keeping their eyes on Banaz. Like I said, she'd left her husband. They didn't approve. They certainly wouldn't approve of her seeing a man that wasn't her husband, and that wasn't what her family had arranged for her. And in her community, arranged marriages were a normal thing. And again, if these weren't carried out, they thought that shame would be brought on them. Eventually, the family did become aware of their relationship together. And like I said, when they did find out, it certainly wasn't well received by her family. Especially by her uncle Ali Agar Mahmod and her father Mahmud Babkir Mahmud. They really did disapprove of this relationship, and they made that very clear to Banaz. So, despite their disapproval, she carried on the relationship. This man made her so happy. And she was basically just really enjoying the difference between the two relationships. Her husband was so abusive towards her. This man was so nice, he was so gentle, they would do things together. It was just basically like a normal relationship, rather than an abusive one. Now, I have read as well that her family actually would keep her confined to try and stop her from seeing her boyfriend, but she did manage to escape this and go and see him anyway. And her family would see how happy they were together, and it totally enraged them. And it enraged them so much that they came to the conclusion that they had to have a family meeting at their uncle's house. They, of course, discussed their relationship together and how much they disapproved. And it was here that they would decide their fate. They took it into their own hands and basically decided that they were going to kill the both of them. And this was because they were bringing such shame on the family that, in their eyes, basically, they no longer deserved to live. And this is just horrific. How could they have sat there, her parents, sat there and discussed killing their own daughter, killing their own niece, killing their own cousin? It's just horrific. I do understand that obviously people have their own religions and their own practices that they follow, but not everyone wants to follow these practices. And this was her own choice. She tried what her parents wanted. She tried the arranged marriage. Maybe if he wasn't so abusive or things like that, things would have ended differently and maybe they would have stayed together, but he was, and she was being abused. We just don't know what would have happened if he was a different person. Still, this was her decision. It was her decision to leave her husband. It was her decision to get with Ramat. Some families sometimes disown the family members for not following in what they believe. They don't murder them. It's just absolutely devastating to even comprehend. She was finally finding some happiness with the man that she wanted to be with, and her family decided, no, that's not happening. We're going to end your life. We're going to steal your life. All she wanted to do was find a man that she loved, that loved her in return, make a family with that person, and in return her family decided that that was enough to kill her because she didn't follow their beliefs and their practices, and it would bring shame to her family. In December 2005, Banaz actually reported to the police that her family were trying to kill her. Basically, she'd overheard a conversation with her mother and her uncle, and they were discussing a plot to try and murder Banaz. So, terrified, not knowing what to do, she went to the police and she reported it. She gave them a list of names. She went on to say that people were also following her around, but basically she wasn't taken seriously and nothing was done about it.
And even now, when I go out, I mean, one guy, as soon as I came out of the house, he was following me with a car. He told me that he should give me a lift and I should go into his car. And I said no and just put my head down and keep walking. So that day he was just following me.
On the 12th of December, she actually wrote a letter to the police. Now, this letter would state that her family were trying to kill her. She stated names of numerous people that were involved that she knew were trying to kill her. And she even stated on this letter that if anything did happen to her, that her father was to blame. Once again, she would be ignored, and I find this completely horrific. Why did they just dismiss her? Maybe if they would have looked into this case, that this sad eventuality as to what actually happened to Banaz may have been different. It could have been completely different if they just listened to her and looked into it, but they didn't. On New Year's Eve, things really escalated. The police were called into a cafe in Wimbledon where Banaz was absolutely beside herself. She was petrified, and she basically said that her father tried to kill her and she had to break the window of a neighbouring house just so that she could escape. She did manage to escape. She stumbled into this cafe, and that's where the police were then attended. The hospital staff and the cafe staff remarked on how distraught Banaz was. And the policewoman that actually interviewed her, once more, didn't believe her story. She thought she was being melodramatic and manipulative, and she even wanted to charge Banaz for actually breaking the window. And this was the same window that she'd broken to try and escape her father from taking her life. Banaz did tell her boyfriend about this, and he actually did some recordings of it, and Ramat later took this to the police. So Banaz told the police that on New Year's Eve, her family told her to come to a family house where they would discuss a divorce. When she arrived, her father told her that she needs to sit down and watch the TV. He forced her to drink brandy, and he basically told her, don't look around, just concentrate on the television. And luckily, she didn't listen to him. She turned round and she found that her father was creeping up behind her, outstretched arms with yellow rubber gloves on. Banaz knew what his plan was. She knew that he was going to kill her. Again, she'd heard the plot already, and this was just him acting it out. It wasn't a great leap for her to come to this conclusion after hearing everything that she'd heard. She actually managed to escape when her father left the room. She took the opportunity and she just ran away. On the 22nd of January, an attempt was made to actually kidnap Ramat. And this was done by 3 men, and these 3 men had already been named by Banaz on her letter to the police. She'd already given them to the police. She was suspicious of them, that they were trying to hurt her and her boyfriend. Both Banaz and Ramat actually reported this to the police separately, and she was scheduled to return to the police station on the 24th of January in conjunction with this. But unfortunately, she would never arrive. She would never make that appointment. On the morning of the 24th of January 2006, which was, as I said before, the day that she was scheduled to return to the police, 3 people arrived at Banaz's house. Now, her parents were out taking their youngest daughter to school, and Banaz was actually asleep in the living room at the time. These 3 people were Mohammed Marid Hammer, Mohammed Salah Ali, and Omar Hussein. And for the next 2 hours, the trio would torture her. They would rape her, before eventually strangling her with a ligature. They then proceeded to stuff her body in a suitcase, and they buried her body in the garden of a house in the West Midlands. On the 25th of January 2006, Ramat reported her missing after being unable to contact her. From what I could find online, police, once more, didn't take that report seriously at first. Because when they made contact with Banaz's parents, they made out that they were so easygoing, that Banaz had stayed out with a friend, she did it all the time, they weren't worried one little bit, and that she was by no means missing. Obviously, her boyfriend knew the murder plots, so they had attempted to kidnap him. He knew something was wrong, so basically he kept harassing the police in a sense to get them to do something, because they just weren't doing anything. And finally, the police did something. They basically took the parents in for interviewing, along with her uncle, and they did search the homes for any evidence. The police instantly noticed inconsistencies with the stories compared to when they were first interviewed. And when they looked into Ramat's phone, they realised that Banaz's father wasn't as easygoing as he tried to make out. And obviously they then looked into the letter again, the letter that Banaz had given them, and they were able to compile a list of people of interest. The Banaz case was handed over to the Metropolitan Police Homicide and Serious Crime Command. And at first, the police thought she was still alive. They basically thought that she'd been kidnapped, she was being held somewhere against her will. They planned a search and arrest operation because of this. Raids were performed on countless properties across England, but they didn't find anything. They went through her phone records, they noticed that not one call had been made after the 24th of January. They went through her bank records, nothing had been taken out, no money had been used. Everything was just silent. The police did arrest multiple suspects, including her father and her uncle Ali. But all of them were completely uncooperative with the police. Even the wider community, the wider Kurdish community, were making active attempts to try and protect the suspects, and basically try and prevent the police from doing the job in any way whatsoever. When they searched the family home, they noticed that there wasn't one picture of Banaz up on the walls anywhere. It was like they just tried to completely erase her from the memory, like she never existed. And obviously this is very suspicious. They would have had pictures up of everyone else, just simply erased her from it. When your daughter's gone missing, why on earth would you take the pictures down? It's just not plausible. On the 4th of February 2006, Mohammed married Hammer was charged with Banaz's murder. Ramat had identified him as one of the people that had threatened them both. And while he was in custody, he actually was recorded bragging about what he'd done to Banaz to some other people. He also said who else was involved and what they'd actually done with Banaz's body. And this obviously implicated her uncles and her cousins in the murder. With this recording and the phone calls and things like that they'd gathered, they basically had all the evidence that they needed. On the 28th of April 2006, Banaz's body was discovered. On the 1st of May 2006, Ari Agar Mahmood was charged with murder, and in August 2006 they charged Mahmood Babakir Mahmood. Mohammed Salah Ali and Omar Hussain actually fled to Iraq Kurdistan after Banaz's murder. In October 2007, Scotland Yard were actually informed that Ali Muhammad Ali was actually in custody. Basically, he was involved in a hit and run that had killed a teenage boy. Muhammad Ali would actually be extradited back to England from Iraq in June 2009. And this was something that had never been done before. Omar Hussain was later found after he had been shot in the leg by one of his brothers. He went to the hospital, obviously needed medical attention, and in December 2009 he came out of hiding, where he was then arrested. At first he tried to claim that he wasn't even in the country when Banaz was murdered, but this didn't fly with the officers, and in March 2010 he was also extradited to England. There would be 3 trials in relation to Banaz Mahmood's murder. Banaz's father was found guilty and was given life imprisonment with a minimum of 20 years. Banaz's uncle was found guilty and was given life imprisonment with a minimum of 23 years. Mohammed Madrid Hammer was also found guilty. He was given life imprisonment with a minimum of 17 years. Pursuing Hammer was found guilty for basically the conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, and he was given time served. Mohammed Banaz's cousin was found guilty of murder, the conspiracy of kidnap, threats to kill, and perverting the course of justice. He was given life imprisonment with a minimum of 22 years. Omar Hussain was found guilty of murder, kidnap, threats to kill, and again perverting the course of justice. He was also charged with preventing the lawful and decent burial and was sentenced to 8 years. Now, there was an investigation into how Banaz's case was handled before her murder, and it was found that basically she'd been let down, that the death threats she reported previously before she was actually murdered weren't taken seriously when they should have been. The police officers involved were given written warnings, and there was actually disciplinary panels held against the officers involved. The actual investigating team that found Banaz's body and went on to build the case against the perpetrators were actually given an award for their work, which I think is a really good thing, because up until that point, Banaz's case was simply dismissed. Ramat, of course, had to go into witness protection. His life had also been threatened. There were threats made to his family, but basically he didn't let that stop him. He continued to testify in the murder trials. He wanted justice for his girlfriend. And I think that was so brave of him, that his family and him were getting these threats, but he continued anyway. He really, really did want justice. But unfortunately, Ramat couldn't actually cope with the isolation, basically, of being in witness protection. And he did actually commit suicide in 2016. And I find this so terribly sad, because Ramat was also a victim. Banaz's life was stolen from her, and so was Ramat's. If none of this had happened to him, he probably would have still been here today. Banaz's sister also had to live in hiding. Basically, she had testified against her entire family in support of Banaz, and that was something that most likely put her in danger. And this is why she actually went into hiding, for fear of what her family might do to her. They'd already taken Banaz's life. What's to stop her from taking hers? She also stated that her life has been hell since the honour killing of her sister. This case was so sad, and I can't actually believe what her family did to her. They stole their own daughter's life for choosing to love a man That wasn't their choice. It's just horrendous. Why couldn't they have just let her go? Why couldn't they have just, if they felt that strongly towards it, like I know a lot of families do, then why didn't they just disown her? I know that's horrible to think about because obviously you love your family and you want them to be in your life, but it would have been so much better. At least she would have had a life. At least she could have raised her own family and just got on with things instead of having her life stolen away from her. If you have any more cases that you'd like me to look into, please do let me know and I will look into them for you. Also, let me know that you don't mind your name being mentioned so I can mention it in the video that it was your suggestion. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the solved case of Banaz Mahmod. Thank you so much for watching and until next time, bye!